Now, expanding upon this idea, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin proposed that great intellectuals and human beings in general also fall into one of these large groups, hedgehogs and foxes. And hedgehogs are what you may call system thinkers. So they relate everything to a single central vision or a universal or organizing principle. But foxes, on the other hand, focus on the diversity or plurality of things and draw on a variety of experiences. And Berlin's essay centered upon Tolstoy's view of history, but since then it has been widely adapted to different fields and various life situations. And it is, of course, an oversimplification, as Berlin himself stated, but it does offer a good starting point from which to look and compare things. And so it also got me thinking about the mindset of the ancient Egyptians as opposed to the Greeks. And if you look at my next slide, which I hope to be able to show. Got it? Yes? Okay, so you can probably make a pretty good guess about who I think would be the hedgehog in this case. So in the 40 or so minutes that will follow, I will try to examine and demonstrate through the example of relief decorated stone dishes why I think of the Egyptians as hedgehogs, and also what happens when the Egyptian hedgehog meets the Greek fox. And first of all, I will need to establish another truism that will provide the basis for my analysis. Life in ancient Egypt was determined by the unique geographical characteristics of the country. And this was also heavily reflected in ancient Egyptian religious thinking. To put it very simply, much of Egypt, which, as you all know, lies in the largest hot desert on the planet, would not be and would not have been habitable if it weren't for the Nile that crosses its country and nourishes its soil. So this constitutes the south to north axis of the ancient Egyptian worldview, which regarded the inundation of the Nile as part of an immense cosmic battle between the forces of order and chaos. And just as important is the east to west axis, which reflects the daily course of the sun, another central element of cosmic magnitude in Egyptian thinking. And each night the sun descends into the underworld on the western horizon, then navigates its way through various dangers and obstacles in order to reach the horizon and be reborn, repeating the act of creation each day with each sunrise. And the reason why I'm starting at point zero, so to say, is something that you will see when we look at the corpus of relief decorated dishes as a whole. I hope you can see some of them on my slide. Like so many other artifacts from ancient Egypt, these works of art are inherently related to solar concepts and are also strongly tied to the inundation of the Nile, and through these, to the idea of regeneration and the yearly renewal of life. Now, as early as 1894, this group was already recognized as an independent Gattung by Theodor Schreiber, but the systematic compilation of the corpus was quite slow and in fact only achieved a few years ago. I'm highlighting here the key steps along the way and must note that, of course, there remains a lot more work to be done. The catalog, in which I attempted to compile the known pieces and fragments, appeared in 2020, and it numbered about 150 items. These are kept in dozens of different museums, art galleries, private collections, and I presume that there are many more fragments which are inaccessible, either in storage or on the art market or still underground. But still, this is already quite a large number from which we can draw conclusions. So let's see what the dishes look like. Again, you can see them, right? I hope. Okay, so all the pieces are of the same general shape and size. Apart from the handles and the spouts, they are perfectly round and relatively shallow. They are quite slow. Sorry. Yeah. So they are quite small. They would easily fit the palm of your hand. The image in the upper right corner gives a good idea of the scale that you might imagine. Most of them have small foot rings, which are either plain, and this is more frequent, or are integrated into the decoration of the exterior. Quite often, they have symmetrically positioned flat handles, decorated with inside volutes, sometimes in the shape of dolphins. And in general, they have a small false spout with angular size below or at the level of the rim. This is not a real spout because there is no connection with the interior, so it could not have been used for pouring liquid, for example. Now let's see what they were made of. The dishes were carved of soft, dark stone. I am not aware of any archaeometrical analysis conducted on any of the specimens, but the stones are generally identified as steatite or soapstone, serpentine, or schist. The colors range from brownish gray to dark gray, plus there are a few pieces in lighter hues, beige and green, and there are some speckled variants like the one on this slide. This perfectly circular shape was achieved by turning the pieces on a lathe, traces of which can be seen on some of the pieces, like here again. And this one also suggests the use of a compass to design the lotus flower. Now, steatite is a soft stone that is relatively easy to work with, but the pieces that I had the opportunity to hold in my hand felt quite hard. So I'm not entirely sure, but there is a possibility that once the designs were carved, the balls were fired in a kiln in order to make them harder and more durable. And this perhaps also resulted in a darker color, which, especially when polished, may have created a resemblance to precious metal vessels that these dishes probably continue. So in fact, we do have a few silver and gilded silver dishes that strongly resemble the character of these cheaper stone specimens. So what can we say about the decoration? Well, they were partly incised and partly executed in relief, like here. On the inside, the figures generally reach up to the rim and occupy at least half of the inner surface. And these central figures may be accompanied by motifs in raised relief, such as here the lotus flower or the grapevines below the figures, or the laurels that surround them. And most dishes bear reliefs also on their outsides. So the center is usually formed by a rosette or a lotus flower, which may be surrounded by one or more wreaths, wine stalks, bunches of grapes, and the pattern of tongues. So let's see what they represent. The unity that was displayed by the formal characteristics is also evident in the iconography, and this creates a solid framework for the interpretation of the entire production. The universal link that connects the various motifs is the idea of creation and regeneration, which, as I have already said, lay at the core of Egyptian religion and was manifest in different forms at different localities throughout the country. The concept was highlighted at yearly festivals that ensured the repetition of creation, in part through the renewal of royal power. And a notable occasion for this was the time of the new year, which was traditionally marked by the arrival of the Nile flood, which is another concept echoed in various motifs on these pieces. I will continue with a quick display of the most prominent themes, but again, a quick note before I start. Egyptian religious thinking was characterized by a theological and iconographical polyvalence. which means that it allowed for different equally valid approaches. So what we see may be interpreted in a variety of complementary ways. And because of this, and also because of the lack of secure find spots that could provide a geographical link between the represented figures and local cults, the precise identification of the deities is sometimes a bit challenging. Since these relief dishes are virtually never inscribed, in many cases we must be content with identifying the role played by the represented deity. So, in broad terms, we have the figure of the goddess as the harbinger of the inundation, returning after a yearly disappearance to mark the beginning of the flood. Now, Isis Sotis is characteristically represented side saddle on a dog, but quite often this universal sky goddess with the horns and this crown appears simply as a bust. So she can be Isis, Hathor, or a number of other goddesses, depending on the relevant location and cultural milieu. Then we also have a triumphant young god who ensures the prosperity of Egypt through maintaining divine order. Now, this is usually a falcon-headed deity that is a solar figure, seen as a bust or in full, either enthroned or triumphantly galloping on a horse, his right hand raised in a gesture of greeting as he returns from the battles fought against the enemies of Ra and Osiris. His victory, sorry, I cannot unmute the dog. His victory means that the solar bark can sail along the flooded river, and the order of the world is reestablished through his coronation as king of Egypt. And this is very much of an Egyptian concept. And in the Egyptian worldview, there was only one person who could carry out such a deed. The maintenance of Maat through the destruction of enemies was the responsibility of the pharaoh. And maybe you can see it better here. This triumphant god here dons a costume worn by those occupying the throne of Egypt at the time, the Ptolemaic and Roman rulers. So beside the Egyptian tripartite wig and the double crown, he wears the Greco-Roman paludamentum, which is fastened with a fibula, although with a touch of the exotic if you look at the baggy pants. This outfit highlights the god's warrior nature, making him identifiable with the Greek Ares. In fact, this is a piece which has a secondary inscription beside the horseman, which actually names the figure as Ares. Now, these two figures, that is the god and the goddess, may appear on their own, as we have seen, sorry, but even more frequently, we see them side by side, and sometimes even in embrace, which is a reference to the sacred marriage celebrated at the return of the goddess. Now, a few dishes make this union explicit in a way that is otherwise quite rare in Egyptian art. So scenes like this have been dismissed as an Alexandrian farce deriding the Egyptian gods, but what we see here is not, I believe, a caricature. This is an imitation of the divine union, or representation of the annual fertilization of Egypt by the Nile flood. You may perhaps note that the figures in the first dish appear above an incised lotus flower, and in both cases they are encircled by a victory wreath. Okay. Our next theme is the solar child. This is a young creator god who appears either on or inside a lotus flower, or, directly emerging from the primordial waters, or in a third case, as the offspring born from the union of the goddess and her consort. We also have the figure of an elderly creator deity. This can be Osiris or Serapis, who is here always accompanied by Isis, or it can also be a ram-headed figure on some of the pieces. Sometimes, like here in the last example, we see two divine generations as a divine triad. And I believe that the two ram-headed gods that sometimes appear, and also the two crocodiles, again, a frequent theme, could also be interpreted along the same line. Now, these prominent themes are all accompanied by motifs of renewal in general. So we have plants as well as animals tied to rebirth and plenitude, like the frog, fish, lizards, and crocodiles. And of course, we also have the personified Nile, in case who appears in the last dish here, but in case you have, difficulty recognizing how it represents the Nile. Here is some help from the Vatican. So actually this is the same figure, the Greco-Roman representation with the bearded reclining man. You can also see the crocodile, the waves around the dish, the cornucopia in his hand, he's leaning on a sphinx. And this crowd, can you see my arrow if I point? So, okay, this crowd is really the 16 children that represent the 16 cubits of water by which the Nile rises for its annual flood. So I will return to the question of iconography in more detail later, but before that, I will just give you a few more facts about the provenance and the dating and the function of the pieces. So, where were they found? Most items have been acquired by museums from the international art market. So little is known about the original find places. The entire series was earlier linked to Alexandria, but the fresh survey has considerably widened this horizon. In fact, Alexandria only appears as a place of purchase. And although there are pieces with lower Egyptian find places, the majority of the dishes come from Upper Egypt, and most importantly, Thebes. Also, thanks to recent excavations conducted by the mission of the University of Barcelona and led by Joan Guzman, the site of Sikait, which is in the eastern desert near the Red Sea, can now be added to our list of known and documented find places. And it is interesting to note that in the rare cases that we have a documented find spot, the context is always ritual. So there are two dishes tied somewhat vaguely to the Luxor temple in Thebes. 5 more pieces and fragments come from the Brooklyn Museum's expedition in the Mood precinct in South Karnak. There is one from the Khnum temple in Elephantine, and the so-called administrative building from which the 3 Sikait fragments come has now also been identified to have a ritual function. There are a few dishes that are known to have been found outside of Egypt. I believe that these are not local products, but Egyptian exports. There is one with the figure of Isis Sotis from Cyprus. Another piece is said to have been found in Asia Minor. And there is a fragment from the Nubian site of Kawa. And of course, one must note here that soapstone and schist dishes or trays in a similar size, color, technique, and decorative pattern were also produced in Gandhara. And that despite some formal differences, the motifs do show similarities with the Egyptian production. And I'm thinking mostly of the rosettes, lotus flowers, you have the wreath, grapes, and the general idea of inebriation. So taken together, these are just 2 strong links to be dismissed as purely incidental. Now, the function of the Gandhara trays has recently been re-evaluated. Harry Falk has suggested that one of the occasions for the use of the trays in Gandhara may have been the auspicious time of the beginning of the year, and identified certain scenes as references to a marriage ceremony. So we have already seen how the concept of sacred marriage permeates the Egyptian production. I believe that there may be more than a superficial connection between the ideas that the two corpuses represent. At the same time, the question of contact and borrowing is quite complicated in itself, and it is rendered even more challenging by the uncertainties of dating regarding both corpuses, actually. Based on archaeological finds at Sirkap in Gandhara, the chronology of the Gandharan production has recently been shifted, broadly speaking, from the late Hellenistic period, so 2nd century BC, 1st century AD, to Roman times, so late 1st, early 2nd centuries AD. And in what follows, I will examine how this correlates with the Egyptian material. So let's see some facts about dates. The production is generally considered to have started during the Hellenistic period, but this needs to be complemented with two facts. The first is that relief decorated stone dishes have even earlier Egyptian forerunners, which are made of different materials like faience, but are closely related in their themes. And two, that the bulk of the known corpus of relief decorated stone dishes is more likely to come from the Roman period. And this dating is partly based on the iconography, but it is also corroborated by the few archaeological contexts that we have, and these are all Roman. What's more, there is a demotic graffito from the Temple of Philae, which contains a reference to what may be a dish from this corpus. It actually mentions in a list of donations delivered by the royal envoy from Meroe, a fiale bearing the bust of Isis in it. Now, this text is also dated to the 3rd century. And so it's also Roman, and so is a Greek text that's connected to the equipment of the temple of Sobek, which also mentions some plates, small plates made of gold and silver that contain a portrait of the crocodile god Socnopaios. Again, a possible reference from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. Now, based on Hellenistic metal prototypes, Michael Promer and Klaus Parlaska both connected the start of the series with the Hellenistic period. And Ursula Mandel-Erzinger also argued for a Hellenistic date for the majority of the dishes. So I think that one explanation for why dishes from the Hellenistic period survived in smaller numbers is that perhaps a larger part of the corpus was then made of precious metal and other perishable materials. In fact, the earliest, it's a wooden shell-shaped dish with a falcon-headed crocodile in relief, and its inside was found in a late 3rd intermediate period grave in Saqqara. So then we are talking about something like the 8th or 7th centuries BC. That's far I can see back if you stay in Egypt, but that's not stone, it's a wooden specimen. Let's see what they were used for. We are again on uncertain grounds here. Several suggestions have been put forward. Earlier scholars argued for a religious function, with even specifically identifying them as libation dishes. Then William Flinders Petrie somewhat downplayed the significance of the corpus by claiming that the pieces were simple cosmetic trays. He actually said that they were, here I quote, mere ornaments of the toilet table, like most of the cut glass bottles and such useless gear made as present, which is not only a bit harsh, but also the cosmetic purpose is contradicted by the height of the principal reliefs, which would have rendered such use rather impractical. Now, ironically, Petrie's remarks may have even contributed to the Gandhara production being labeled as a toilet trays by John Marshall. Probably those two had little to do with cosmetics. At the same time, dishes can hardly have served libations either. So both their small size and the non-functional spouts would speak against such use. And Ursula Mandel-Erzinger raised the idea that they may have been intended for magico-medical purposes, much like the Horus tablets. That is, water was poured over the dishes, and once the liquid absorbed the power of the images, it was drunk by the patient who was then healed. And well, I'm treading on absolutely uncertain grounds here, but I can also mention a passage from Galen from the 2nd century AD, who writes about certain black Alexandrian vessels that need to be chopped up and sifted through a fine sieve, and thus produce a substance which is efficient in thinning hair. So I'm not sure this is a valid reference, so I'm leaving the possibility open. But actually, there are some pieces that do so some kind of wear that could be taken as evidence for a scrubbing. But what is most plausible then is that what the dishes served was some kind of a votive or cultic purpose. And if we return to their coherent iconographical framework, then this purpose seems to be tied to age-old temple festivals connected to the idea of regeneration. And as I said, the most prominent one of these festivals fell at the time of the new year, but the dishes do not need to be tied to a single occasion. They show links with all the major seasonal celebrations that followed the rise and fall of the Nile. And the principal themes of the dishes, the Alexandrian triad, whose members were worshipped as dynastic gods in Greco-Roman Egypt, or the galloping falcon-headed Horus, appearing as the triumphant ruler, then Isis as the Apis solar eye. All of them complemented with motifs of creation and regeneration, were meant to provide a triumphal display of divine and royal power, aimed at the single most important task entrusted to Egypt's divine rulers and ruling gods, and that is the renewal of the ordered world through the perpetuation of creation. So what these dishes embody is very much of a central idea in Egyptian religious thinking. Creation and the repetition of creation is the universal governing principle that the Egyptian hedgehog revolves around. And what is so striking about the corpus, though, is the ease with which this very old idea finds new means of expression, and how these new means of expression enrich the extant concepts. And I will just show you a few examples. It's not only Isis that we have on the dishes. Here on this piece, the goddess wears a helmet and an aegis decorated with the head of Medusa. This is, of course, the Greek goddess Pallas Athena. And she appears on her own, as if independent from Egyptian religious concepts. But if you think of the Egyptian goddess that Athena was identified with, that is Neith, then her appearance makes quite a lot of sense on this corpus. So in the theology of Sais and Esna, Neith is a celestial creator. She rises from the noon, the primordial waters, and gives birth to Ra, the sun. She had a nocturnal festival, which was connected to the mysteries of Osiris, and it was accompanied by the lighting of lamps throughout the country. Now, many such lamps and lanterns survived from the Egyptian Korah from Roman times, and most of them show the Egyptian goddess in her Greek manifestation as Athena. What's more, you can even see the Gorgoneion incorporated into the design on another piece, which has Isis and Serapis on the other side. Then we have another goddess, Aphrodite. She appears on 3 specimens that I know so far, always as Aphrodite Anadyomene, that is, as a goddess born or rising from the water and wringing her wet hair. So on this first example, you can see her standing against a plain background. Unfortunately, I do not have a good photo of the back, but it shows a rosette. Then the second one, oops, sorry. I'm mixing up my slides, but here we are. So the second one shows her crouching on a plain background again, but you can see that there is a wreath, laurel wreath that encircles her figure. The backside is again decorated with a large rosette. And I discovered a third one just a couple of days ago as I was preparing for this talk. It is currently up for sale if anyone is interested. There is one more element to be noted here, is that the crouching goddess, again of the Rhodian type, like the former example, she's actually crouching on a lotus flower. So through this element, the place of her birth is, so to say, transferred from Cyprus to Egypt. And the sea becomes equated with Egypt's primordial waters of creation. And well, the gallery even has a short video on its site, which I'm sorry about the nails, but I'm going to show this to you because you can see quite well how finely this piece is carved, and the figure is almost completely in the round. Even though it's very small, all the details are quite delicate. And you can also see how finely the back is carved. Again, there is a rosette in the center, which is surrounded with laurel leaves, vine tendrils and bunches of grapes, and then a tongue and leaves pattern. So, yeah. Now, if you think of the Egyptian counterpart of the Greek Aphrodite, that's of course Hathor, who is a goddess associated with the eye of the sun. She's the daughter of the solar god Ra. She's also called the mistress of heaven. And in the midst of the sun's eye, she's the dangerous goddess who leaves Egypt and then has to be pacified and lured back to the country. And then her return marks the arrival of the annual flood. She is greeted by the people of Egypt who are singing and dancing, making music. And the joyous festival is crowned with her sacred marriage to her consort. And I believe that it is this union which is immortalized in the images that represent the two gods in embrace. And at this point, I would like to show you a special subset of this corpus. These are pieces that were designed in the shape of a shell. Now, these are of an equally small size, and they too are generally carved of dark, soft stone. Perhaps in the next image, you can see this better, that the shell is surrounded by a pair of outstretched wings. What's more, some pieces have even retained the corresponding head, which is that of a falcon. So in the end, what you see is a falcon with head turned back as if floating on its back. And I have an idea about these pieces that I kind of buried in a footnote in my earlier summary, but I will bring it up here again in the hopes that someone might have a comment on it. I think that this structure, which is composed of the figure of a falcon in flight and the shell, may have a distant connection with, or actually be a remote echo of the writing of the name of Hathor in hieroglyphs, which looks like this. So you have the figure of a falcon, that is Horus, inside a sanctuary, which is Hut in Egyptian. So the name of Hathor basically translates into English as the house or estate of Horus. And there have been other attempts at an interpretation of this name, but what is certain is that the name, which is an essential component of the identity of this deity, encapsulates the union between these two gods, Hathor and Horus. And I think that what we see here in the falcon and shell structure is basically the same. So Horus appears inside or merges into the figure of the goddess, who is here represented through the shell of Aphrodite. And again, it may be it's not too far-fetched to transpose the shell into the sky, which in Egyptian thought was actually conceived as a body of water through which the sun god sailed. And I have a few more pieces to show, if you don't mind. This next one actually provides evidence that we really need to look up to the sky to find our goddess. It quite explicitly shows the returning goddess in the sky. So the figure of Isis Sotis is in the center. It's encircled by two bands. The inner one contains the signs of the Greek zodiac, and the outer one, you can see the planets and different manifestations of the sun. So you have Helios, the solar child, a falcon-headed crocodile, scarab, and also the moon. But this is not all. The other side of the dish makes a clear reference to the season. So the period of the new year and the coming of the flood. Because in the center, there is a rectangular pool with flights of steps leading to its bottom on each side, which I take to be a nilometer meant to record the level of the inundation. And this is positioned above a detailed representation of a lotus flower with two buds, which is a symbol for creation. And around the pool, there are figures in raised relief, going from clockwise from left to right. We see Euthenia, which is a female personification of abundance, who was honored as the consort of the Nile. Then there is the Nile god himself. Then comes the ibis-headed Thoth, who is crowned with the Atef crown and holds an open papyrus roll in his hands. So he appears as a lector priest who recites the hymns or spells during a ritual. And this ritual seems to be accompanied with music, because this Isis-like figure, who is crowned with the cow's horns and the solar disk, is shown playing a harp, the trigonum. And this entire group is facing a falcon-headed crocodile who wears the double crown of Egypt. And I think it is probably safe to say that this is a young solar form of Sobek reborn after dispelling the forces of chaos. And if we return to the figure of Euthenia for one more glance, you will see that she actually merges, so to say, components of other goddesses. So the fringed dress she is wearing is typical of Isis. The way she touches her hair, which is probably wet from the water, is a link to Aphrodite. The ears of corn in her right hand connect her with Demeter, the Greek goddess of agriculture. And so here, I would just like to point to my last pieces, which are really interesting because they show a divine couple, but it is not a god and a goddess, it's two goddesses. And they either appear by themselves or they flank a central deity of a chthonic character. It's either Serapis or the ram-headed Chnum in these two specimens. Here, I think, again, the appearance of the second goddess adds an additional Greek reading to the production. So from an Egyptian perspective, the natural cycle of renewal revolves around the Nile flood. And the Egyptian reading of the dishes becomes coherent within the context of the myth related to the inundation and the union of the divine couple. But from a Greek perspective, the renewal of nature may be seen as depending on the encounter of two chthonic goddesses. And this allows for an identification of the two figures as Demeter and Persephone. And this Greek reading also echoes the Egyptian one, in that both capture the moment when this liminal period comes to an end. So in the latter, we see the return of the appeased eye of the sun, which launches the inundation. And in the former, we see the return of Persephone and the appeasement of Demeter, which leads to the barren earth yielding plentiful crops again. And of course, these parallel representations of Egyptian and Greek myth are not confined to the corpus of stone dishes. For example, in the Roman period, the story of Persephone appears side by side the myth of Osiris in a funerary context in the catacombs of Comes Shukafa in Alexandria. Or we have this funerary stela from Terenutis. Here you can even see Anubis incorporated into the abduction scene. Then the Greek zodiac also accompanies the figure of Isis Sotis in the tombs of the El Salamuni necropolis. Then we have already seen how Neith appears in the guise of Athena on lamps, but you could also cite other examples. And my last one, a stela, which really cleverly shows the figures of Aphrodite and Hathor merged. The goddess is crouching on the back of two crocodiles within an Egyptian sanctuary. And this list could easily be continued, but I will just stop here because our time is basically, I think, slowly up. And I think you can also already see what I am driving at. Like the sources that I just mentioned, the stone dishes that I've been talking about were also designed by people who were familiar with the many phases of the age-old religious concepts and symbols and myth of ancient Egypt. But their creators were also able, and not only able, but willing to express these concepts in another visual language for users or for an audience that must have been fluent in the different but equally valid and complementary readings of these representations. These dishes have sometimes been dismissed as clumsy and bizarre and un-Egyptian, but I think that they should really be hailed for their ingenuity, because what they exhibit is that in Egypt, as elsewhere, the encounter with Greek culture enriched the indigenous forms of artistic expression with new possibilities and offered entirely new ways of formulating concepts and ideas that had been present for millennia. And even if we are unsure about the exact function of these pieces, I think that the fact that they come from temple contexts shows that the Egyptian hedgehog was, after all, quite open towards what the Greek fox had to say. So the Egyptian ideas expressed in a Greek style and incorporating Greek elements indicate a sophisticated understanding of classical imagery, which shows that what they had learned from the Greeks was not dismissed as subsidiary, but actually found its way into the mainstream. And again, we can see that it is not simply a translation or a side-by-side coexistence of the two systems that would serve different clients, but it is an active encounter and a fluid interaction between the two. And so maybe the Egyptian hedgehog was also something of a fox after all. Thank you for your attention. And sorry again for the slides. I'm really not sure what went wrong, but I hope you could still follow.
Well, thanks, Kata, for that amazing paper. It was really fascinating for me to listen to, and particularly this idea that, you know, that visual languages, there is such a thing as cultures have such a thing as visual languages, and that you can think of art in terms of this kind of bilingualism, this blending of codes is really striking and fascinating to me. And I hope that the people, our audience of people who obviously are much more aware of these things on especially the Egyptian side than I am, we'll have lots of questions and examples of questions about the pieces you've brought forward, and examples of similar phenomena in Graeco-Egyptian culture. It was really lovely. Yeah, I'd like to open the floor to questions, and basically in the past, the way we've done this is we've asked people if they feel confident and able, please, to use the microphone and ask their questions themselves. Those of you who either don't have a working camera and microphone or simply aren't confident in talking in this way, can of course put your question. You can put your questions in the chat, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, so we have a Kata, can you see Annette's question?
No, maybe if I stop sharing my screen, then it will.
Okay, yeah. Well, we can always call the pictures back if we want them.
Okay, now I'm saying, yeah.
Okay. Oh, so it's not a question, but a comment. Okay.
The focus on the red, make them more fatter. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I think we have a question now from Alexander von Lieven.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This was very fascinating. In relation to the dishes with the different deities, my impression was that they also have a lot of the local deities, so maybe this is also gnome specific. For example, the one where you showed this falcon-headed crocodile, this very much reminded me of a certain version of a local deity in Sognopaionesos. And in terms of these two goddesses, together with Khnum, that was very interesting because I think from the Egyptian point of view, what I would immediately think of course, would be the goddesses Satet and Anuket, which are precisely the two local deities of Elephantine. And they are, in fact, they are the oldest ones. And later Khnum comes also there into play, and so they are in a way a triad, but not a normal triad, but they are definitely the very important. And interestingly enough, the goddess Satet, which originally, I mean, the Egyptian name is simply Setchet, the one who is pouring out the Nile inundation, and Anuket is the one who is actually taking it back then. But in the Greco-Roman period, the name Satet was pronounced Satis, which very much sounded like Zotis. So also they could be in a way conflated, which is also shown in the some bronze figures of the goddess, where she gets a little star on top of her crown. So I would have an Egyptian way to explain those two goddesses in the local mythology of Elephantine. Of course, this does not say that in Interpretatio Graeca you couldn't also have different things, but I would see a clear Egyptian local mythology behind this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's absolutely possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think Joachim Kwak wants to say something.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating lecture. I have one more idea concerning this crocodile with a falcon head, which might be worth pursuing further. In the Greek magical papyrus Palladion E395, which is PGM 13, we have this complicated ritual, very complicated, involving retelling the creation of the world, and within the indications on how to do it, it's also recommended that a crocodile with a falcon head should be drawn, among other figures. And it's told that this crocodile salutes the god 4 times a year, among them also when Horus is born and when there is the heliacal rise of Sotis. So that might fit in quite nicely.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, Peter Stewart.
Hi, thank you very much. This was really fascinating. I'm particularly interested in the connection between these dishes and the Gandharan so-called palettes. And it was really interesting to see the coincidence between the redating of the Gandharan palettes, the late date of the Gandharan material and these dishes. I had a basic question about one of your comments. Sometimes when you read about this relationship with the classical world, people link the Gandharan dishes to either to Egypt or to Asia Minor, and you had shown some examples that you regarded as probably exports from Egypt. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's the case with all of the material that has been found elsewhere, or is there still a possibility of production of very similar dishes in Asia Minor?
The piece that I showed with the Asia Minor provenance, I tried to look for it and show it to you again. I don't know if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. So actually I showed the back side because the front is quite problematic. So concerning this piece, I have the feeling that the back is original, and what we see in the front is actually a figure of Hermes surrounded by other figures, and he looks really strange. I don't have a picture of it right now, but I'd be happy to send it to you. So I don't even know if this is a genuine piece or not. This is the only one that we have a so-called Asia Minor provenance that comes from the literature. So I wouldn't base anything on this.
That's and certainly these very suggestive.
Yeah, the three pieces are all that I know of that were found outside of Egypt. So these are not examples, these are all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but I think that just getting back to the Gandhara connection, that these finds from Sikait, which were actually, it's right on the Red Sea port. So it kind of opens a way in that direction. So
yeah, that was really interesting. I noted that mentally when you said it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do we have any other questions or comments?
I think we have someone in the. Yeah, let's just thank you. Okay. Sorry,
yes, we have a comment from Fabio Spadini.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Fabio.
Hi. Yes, I have just a quick question about the dish with the zodiac.
Yeah.
Do you have any interpretation of why there are only 10 zodiacal signs and Aquarius and Pisces are not?
No, yeah, Aquarius and Pisces are missing. I don't know why. So, no.
Okay.
but it's good that you noticed they are missing, but I don't know why.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there would have been room, I think. So, so it's not just bad design.
So it was a conscious decision then.
I think yes, but I don't know the reason.
Yes, Alexandra's just asking for a copy of the picture of the Athens dish if you if you send it.
Which one?
Alexandra's just asking for a picture of the Athens dish if you sent it.
Yes. I could try to look for it on my computer, but I'm kind of afraid of splitting the screen sharing. But I will send it to you.
Fair enough. Well, do we have it? Do you have any other questions or comments? Well, if not, then I think we should thank Kata for her wonderful paper, which was so informative and so interesting and on such fascinating material. And I look forward. We all look forward to, but especially Kata, of course, looks forward to seeing you all at our next Graeco Aegyptiaca lecture, which will take place next month, more or less the same time. But we'll be sending adverts out for that shortly. But thank you all very much for coming, and thank you for your questions. I'm really delighted that there were so many of you, and yes, it's been great. Thanks, Kata. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Goodbye to all.